Picture this. Flickering torchlight dances across a cobblestone square in medieval Edinburgh, where the air hangs heavy with the tang of salt spray from the Firth of Forth and the sour reek of unwashed wool. Iron bars glint like teeth in the gloom, their rust-flecked jaws poised to snap shut on flesh and fury alike. A woman's silhouette trembles against the scaffold, her shadow stretching long and twisted, as if the night itself recoils from what is to come. She didn't know it yet, but her tongue was the Empire's greatest fear, a blade sharper than any sword, forged in the fire of unspoken truths, and what they clamped upon her that dawn would echo through centuries, a muzzle not just for one voice, but for the roar of every woman who dared to speak. Subscribe to join us inside history's darkest rooms, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let us begin. The wind howled off the North Sea like a banshee's wail, whipping the hems of cloaks and the fringes of banners that fluttered from the town hall's crooked eaves. It was the year 1567, and in the shadowed heart of Scotland, where the Reformation's flames still smouldered in peat fires and pulpit sermons, a woman named Elspeth MacRae stood accused, not of theft nor murder, nor the black arts that sent witches to the pyre, but of words. Sharp words, they said, hurled like stones at her husband's impotence, at the magistrate's hypocrisy, at the kirk elder's wandering eyes. Elspeth, a fishwife with calloused hands and a voice honed by years of haggling over herring barrels, had become the embodiment of the scold. That spectral figure men whispered of in taverns, the woman whose tongue could unravel the fragile weave of patriarchal order. Slow zoom on her face, weathered by salt and sorrow, eyes like storm-tossed slate. The crowd gathers, merchants in velvet doublets, maids with kerchiefs clutched tight, children perched on barrels for a better view. They come not for justice, but for the spectacle, the ritual that turns rebellion into entertainment. The blacksmith, his apron stained with soot and old blood, hefts the device from a burlap sack. The scold's bridle, that grotesque crown of iron, its frame a cage of curved bars etched with fleur-de-lis, a mockery of royal grace. At its center, the bit, a flat iron tongue, perforated for a spike if the mood struck crueler. This was no mere restraint, it was the iron maw incarnate, a devouring relic born in the forges of 16th century England, smuggled north by Puritan zealots who saw women's silence as divine mandate. In the silence they demanded, they buried their own screams. Elspeth's trial had been a farce, a cacophony of male voices in the kirk's echoing nave. The elder, red-faced and righteous, recited Proverbs 31 twisted to venom. A foolish woman is clamorous, she is simple and knoweth nothing. Her husband, a weaver whose threads tangled as often as his lies, testified with downcast eyes, claiming her barbs had unmanned him before God and guild. But beneath the bluster lay the psychological rot, a society's paranoia festering like an untreated wound. Men perched atop their thrones of scripture and statute trembled at the power of a woman's voice, not for its volume, but for its truth. What if her words exposed the rot in their ambitions? What if her rage ignited the powder keg of peasant unrest? In Elspeth's defiance, they saw not one fishwife's folly, but the spectre of every daughter, every wife, every queen, who might one day shatter the glass of their dominion. It was delusion wrapped in dogma, the belief that femininity was fragility, and fragility must be forged into obedience. The magistrate, his wig powdered white as bone, nods. The blacksmith approaches, his hammer swinging like a pendulum of doom. Elspeth's wrists are bound with hemp rope, coarse as the fishermen's nets that once fed her family. She spits defiance one last time. "Ye craven curs, may your own tongue swell and choke ye." And the crowd titters, a ripple of unease masked as mirth. But the cruelty had only just begun. They force her head back, the cold metal kissing her cheeks like a lover turned executioner. The frame locks with a click that echoes louder than thunder, bars pressing into her temples, drawing pinpricks of blood that trickle warm and sticky down her neck. Her jaw pries open, unnatural and aching, as the bit slides across her tongue. Flat, unyielding, tasting of rust and yesterday's rain. She gags, retches, but they hold firm, thumbs digging into her jawbone until it creaks. Then, the spike. A slender nail, hammered through the perforation with 3 deliberate blows. Flesh tears with a wet rip, blood blooming crimson on her chin, dripping in slow, deliberate patters onto the scaffold's scarred planks. Her scream, oh, that flesh-tearing scream, chokes into a gurgle, muffled by the Moor's embrace, reduced to bubbles of froth and agony. The crowd leans in, faces alight with the grotesque thrill, as if her pain were a communal feast. Her voice, once a storm, now a whisper drowned in iron. In that blood-drenched moment, everything shattered. Elspeth's spirit, the illusion of mercy, the brittle pact between ruler and ruled. She is paraded then, leashed like a dog through the high street, the bridle yanking her head down in enforced humility. Stones pelt her skirts, not lethal, but stinging reminders that the mob's delight is as fickle as the tide. Hours pass in this slow-motion nightmare, her mouth a throbbing forge of fire, saliva mixing with blood to form a slurry that dribbles ceaselessly. By dusk, when they unclamp the maw, her tongue swells purple and raw, words reduced to slurred moans. She collapses in the mud, not broken, but branded. Forever the scold, her silence a victory for the silent. Yet herein lies the haunting irony. The very device meant to still rebellion amplified it. Elspeth's ordeal, whispered from hearth to hearth, sowed seeds of quiet fury among the women of the winds. What they silenced in her echoed in 1,000 unspoken oaths of vengeance. And as the iron cooled in the blacksmith's quench trough, steaming like a demon's breath, one couldn't help but wonder. He who muzzles the storm invites the flood. This paranoia of the unspoken, of voices rising like ghosts from the grave, mirrors our own era's digital witch hunts, where a single tweet can summon the mob's iron bit. In boardrooms and algorithms alike, the fear persists. What truths might women unleash if not leashed? But Elspeth's tale was merely the prelude. Deeper in the continent's shadowed courts, another Moor awaited, hungrier still for flesh and fidelity. What they devised next defies imagination. The bridle's bite. Pause here. What would you do if your words were deemed a crime? Speak louder or swallow the silence. Comment below and hit like if you're hooked. Would you wear the bridle for truth or bite your tongue? Vote now. The carriage wheels crunch over frost-laced gravel, a rhythmic dirge under the slate-gray sky of 1592 Bavaria. Snow dusts the spires of Nuremberg like powdered ash from a funeral pyre. And in the town square the executioner's scaffold looms, a black altar etched with the ghosts of confessions long extracted. Torch smoke curls upward, acrid and oily, mingling with the faint metallic tang of impending blood. A woman is dragged forth, her skirts torn and muddied, her breaths coming in ragged gasps that fog the chill air. Her name is Greta Vogel, once a baker's wife, now branded adulteress. Her sin, not love, but the audacity of desire in a world that viewed women's bodies as communal property. She felt the weight of their stares like chains, each eye a link forged in judgment's unyielding fire. And what they heated in the braziers that Eve would scar not just her flesh, but the very notion of female autonomy, leaving wounds that time could never cauterize. The trial had unfolded in the dim vaults of the rat house, where candle flames guttered like dying hopes against walls slick with centuries of damp. Greta, accused by a jealous neighbor whose husband had strayed too close to her oven's warmth, stood unbowed amid the tribunal's drone. The inquisitor, a gaunt figure in black robes that pooled like ink, pored over depositions stained with ink and innuendo. "Thou hast lain with another," he intoned, his voice a serpent's hiss, "defiling the sacred vessel of thy womb." But woven into the charge was ambition's rot. Greta's bakery thrived on her sharp wit and sweeter loaves, drawing men who lingered not for bread alone. In her allure, the men of the guild saw threat, a woman whose independence mocked their monopolies, whose laughter in the market challenged the silence imposed by hearth and husband. Slow zoom on the tribunal's faces, masks of piety cracking under the strain of suppressed lust. The psychological insight uncoils here, insidious as smoke. Rage, not at her infidelity, but at her agency. In an age where women's worth was measured in wombs and whispers, Greta's crime was visibility, stepping beyond the veil of subservience into the light of self-possession. It bred a collective delusion, this rage, the belief that a woman's body was a canvas for societal sadism, to be inscribed with pain until the lines of obedience were indelible. Magistrates and mobs alike, they projected their own crumbling empires onto her skin, convinced that one torn breast could mend the fractures in their fragile rule. The sentence falls like an axe. The breast ripper, that infernal contraption of Nuremberg's forges, reserved for the unchaste. The blacksmith, same lineage as Elspeth's tormentor it seemed, unveils it from a velvet shroud, though no velvet could soften its horror. 4 iron claws curved like a spider's legs, mounted on a wooden handle etched with Teutonic runes. Heated in the brazier until they glow cherry red, they promise not swift death, but prolonged erasure, to rend the symbols of nurture, leaving a woman not just scarred, but dehumanized, her femininity flayed as warning to all. In ripping her flesh, they tore at the threads of their own humanity. Greta is stripped to the waist, the winter wind clawing her skin like preliminary fingers. Bound to the post, her arms wrenched high, she feels the cold bite of manacles first, echoes of the iron maw. That devouring motif slithering through Europe's underbelly. The crowd swells, breath held in morbid anticipation, wives averting eyes while husbands crane forward, their cheers a guttural hymn to control. The executioner, hooded and silent, selects the claws, their heat shimmering the air like a mirage of hellfire. He approaches, deliberate, the metal humming with malevolent promise. The shock descends in slow motion, a symphony of cruelty conducted in flesh-ripping agony. The first claw kisses her left breast, searing skin with a sizzle that drowns her gasp, blistered flesh bubbling, the stench of charred meat rising like incense to vengeful gods. She arches, cord straining, but the second follows, piercing deeper, teeth sinking into the tender swell with a crunch of yielding tissue. Blood wells, dark and viscous, steaming on the iron as it withdraws, trailing strings of sinew that snap like overtaut lute strings. Her scream erupts then, a soul-crushing wail that fractures the square's false piety, echoing off the guild halls as the third claw claims its mate. Ripped free in a crimson arc, the breast hangs ravaged, a ruin of lacerated lobes and exposed ribs, milk ducts weeping scarlet mockery of the motherhood they desecrated. The fourth claw lingers, teasing the nipple's ruin, twisting until bone gleams white amid the gore. Greta's vision blurs to red, her body a quaking forge of pain, but her eyes, oh, those eyes, burn with unquenched fire, damning each face in the throng. Her body, broken, became the mirror to their monstrous souls. The crowd disperses in hushed awe, leaving her slumped in pooling blood, surgeons summoned not for mercy, but to stitch just enough for survival. A living testament, they called it. Days blurred into fevered nights, infection gnawing at the edges of her wounds like rats in the rafters. Her breath shallow rasps through gritted teeth. Yet the irony haunts like a persistent specter. In punishing her sensuality, they amplified it. Greta's survival, whispered through the bakeries of the Rhine, birthed legends of the Red Widow, a phantom whose scars warned not of chastity's virtue, but of retribution's bite. The very device meant to shame birthed a shadow empire of silent solidarity among the silenced. They tore her flesh to bind her will, but in the blood she found her wings. This rage against autonomy lingers in today's shadowed corners, where women's choices over bodies, careers, voices are policed with subtler claws, from courtrooms to comment sections. The breast rippers echo, in the brutal scrutiny of every fallen woman, reminding us that some maws never rust. But Greta's torment was no isolated savagery. Across the Channel, in the damp dungeons of France, another contraption yawned wide, its petals unfurling for sins of the spirit. His fate was sealed, though she did not yet know it. Claws of crimson shame. Pause here. Faced with such violation, would you curse your accusers or plot in the silence? Comment below and hit like if you're hooked. Did her sin deserve the Ripper, or was it society's fury? Vote now. The Seine laps at the moss-slicked walls of the Conciergerie, its waters black as ink under the gibbous moon of 1634 Paris. Torchlight from the riverbank flickers erratic, casting elongated shadows that slither like serpents across the prison's arched gates, where the iron portcullis groans open to swallow the condemned. Damp stone exhales a breath of mildew and despair, laced with the faint coppery promise of blood yet to spill. A woman is hauled from the tumbrel, her once fine gown reduced to rags that cling like second skin, her hair a wild cascade matted with the grime of the Châtelet cells. Her name is Marguerite Duval, a nobleman's widow accused of heresy, not for devil's pacts, but for the sin of intellect, her forbidden books and whispered philosophies deemed poison to the soul. She clutched the locket at her throat, its gold warmed by her fevered pulse, unaware it would soon be the last light in her unraveling world. And what they unfolded in the torchlit chamber that night would bloom into a garden of thorns, where women's minds were pruned like weeds, their thoughts left to wither in perpetual shadow. Marguerite's downfall traced back to the salons of the Rue des Lions, those gilded hives where intellect buzzed like bees in a crumbling hive. A widow of means, she had inherited not just her husband's library, volumes of Descartes and forbidden alchemical tomes, but a dangerous curiosity that bloomed unchecked. Her gatherings drew the curious, poets with ink-stained fingers, philosophers cloaked in doubt, women veiled in secrecy who dared to question the divine right of kings and the divine silence of wives. But whispers reached the ears of Cardinal Richelieu's spies, those spectral informants who moved through the courts like smoke. Accused of spreading heretical vapors, Marguerite was seized in a midnight raid, her books consigned to flames that danced higher than the pyres of old. Slow zoom on the interrogator's face, a mask of zeal carved from parchment skin, eyes sunken like wells of fanaticism. The major historical beat unfolds in the bowels of the prison, where the pair unfurls its mechanical blasphemy. This was the poire d'angoisse, the pair of anguish, a device whispered of in the torture manuals of the Inquisition, its origins lost in the fog of medieval Spain, but perfected in France's absolutist forges. A pear-shaped bulb of brass, segmented like a fruit from Hades, with a screw mechanism to expand its lobes from gentle orb to jagged maw. For women like Marguerite, it was no blunt instrument of bone-breaking. It targeted the intimate, the orifices of speech and secrecy, mouth, vagina, rectum, swelling to lacerate from within, a violation that turned confession into a crimson sacrament. In silencing her mind, they devoured her very breath. The psychological insight coils here, a serpent of delusion, paranoia, not of the divine, but of the feminine intellect. Richelieu's France, a tapestry of red robes and iron edicts, trembled at the thought of women thinking beyond the cradle and the kitchen. Marguerite's crime was not heresy alone, but the ambition it masked, a quiet rage against the cage of prescribed roles, where a widow's wisdom was seen as widow's weed, choking the vines of male authority. Inquisitors, their own faiths frayed by doubt, projected this fear onto her. What if her words, like seeds in fertile soil, sprouted revolutions in the salons? It bred a madness, this paranoia, convincing them that truth dwelled in torment, and women's silence was the empire's salvation. Her locket, engraved with a blooming pear tree, irony's cruel jest, swung against her chest, its chain a noose of memory, each link heavy with the weight of lost freedoms. They strip her in the chamber, the air thick with the reek of tallow and terror, her skin prickling under the gaze of hooded assistants. Bound to the rack, wrists and ankles secured in leather cuffs that bite like adders, she feels the cold brass first against her lips, a kiss of betrayal, smooth and deceptive. "Confess," the interrogator murmurs, his breath hot with cloves and cruelty, and the pear remains but a fruit. She spits defiance. "Your God fears my questions more than my lies." And the screw turns. The first twist is gentle, petals nudging her teeth apart, filling her mouth with the taste of oiled metal and dread. But the cruelty had only just begun. The shock erupts in visceral symphony, a slow-motion unraveling of flesh and fortitude. Turn by turn, the pair swells, lobes blooming like a flower in hell, pressing against palate and cheeks, then gums and jaw with inexorable force. Marguerite's eyes bulge, whites veined red as capillaries burst, her throat convulsing in futile swallows. At the third rotation, skin splits, delicate membranes tearing with wet pops, blood flooding her mouth in a warm, salty tide that dribbles from nostrils and corners alike. The fourth twist rends deeper, teeth cracking under the pressure, fragments embedding in swollen tissue as the device expands to fist size, a barbed intruder shredding the cavity into a pulped ruin. Her scream chokes into gurgles, froth and gore bubbling forth, body arching in flesh-ripping agony that arches her spine like a bowstring drawn to snap. Removed after an eternity of 15 minutes, the pair drips crimson, petals slick with the remnants of her voice, tongue lacerated, jaw dislocated, a maw of exposed bone and quivering meat. She slumps, breaths whistling through the wreckage, her locket now smeared with the evidence of their zeal. The pair they forced upon her bore fruit in screams that outlasted stone. The aftermath lingers like a fever dream. Stitched and bandaged, Marguerite survives to recant in whispers, her salon dissolved, her books ash. Yet the haunting irony gleams like fool's gold. The device meant to extract truth birthed deeper deceptions. Her fragmented confessions, twisted by pain, fueled Richelieu's purges, but in the shadows of Parisian attics, her silenced sisters preserved the tomes, passing them hand to hand like contraband sacraments. They swelled her silence to drown her wisdom, but in the blood her questions multiplied. This paranoia of the probing mind echoes in our surveillance-saturated age, where algorithms hunt dangerous ideas like inquisitors of old, turning every search into a potential rack. Women's voices, still suspect, remind us, knowledge is the pear they fear to unfold, but Marguerite's petals were but one bloom in the garden of grotesquerie. Farther east, in the shadowed halls of the Holy Roman Empire, a maiden of iron awaited, her embrace promising not just death, but a lover's lethal lie. What they locked inside next defies the soul's endurance. Pair of forbidden truths. Pause here. Tormented for your thoughts, would you confess falsely or endure the bloom? Comment below and hit like if you're hooked. Was the pair justice for heresy or fear of her mind? Vote now. Thunder rolls across the spires of 19th century Prague, the Vltava swollen and sullen under storm clouds that weep leaden rain onto the Charles Bridges statues, saints frozen in eternal judgment, their stone eyes blind to the procession below. The air thrums with ozone and the distant clamour of the old town square, where the scaffold rises like a skeletal throne, draped in black velvet sodden with downpour. Chains rattle faintly, a counterpoint to the bells tolling from Teen Church, as a woman is led forth, her irons clanking in dirge-like rhythm, her face a porcelain mask cracked by terror. She is Anna Kowalska, a Polish seamstress exiled to Bohemian courts, condemned not for treason, but for the audacity of escape, fleeing an abusive lord whose rights extended to her very bones. Her chains, forged in the smithies of Habsburg spite, dragged not just her body, but the ghost of every flight denied. And what they enclosed her in that tempest-torn twilight would forge a legend of leaden lies, where women's struggles were entombed in iron fantasies of redemption. Anna's saga began in the cramped ateliers of Warsaw, where needle and thread wove not just garments, but dreams of deliverance. Betrothed to a minor noble whose tempers flared like Polish winters, she endured bruises hidden beneath lace cuffs, her spirit fraying like overworked silk. In 1831, amid the November uprising's dying embers, she slipped her bonds. Fleeing south across borders, laced with Cossack patrols, her path a tapestry of barns and beggars' kindness. But capture came swift in Prague's web of informers, her theft of self decried as moral bankruptcy. The trial, a sham in the Landesgericht's vaulted halls, painted her not victim, but vixen, a runaway whose flight mocked the sanctity of submission. Slow zoom on the judge's gavel. wood scarred by countless falls, each strike echoing the heartbeat of empire. The major historical beat crests with the Iron Maiden, that mythic sarcophagus of suffering, though history's quill reveals her as no medieval phantom but a 19th century spectre, born in the torture chambers of Nuremberg's successors and wielded against women who dared defy their chains. A coffin of oak and iron, lined with inward spikes, hundreds from needle-fine to thumb-thick, its door a yawning grave, hinges creaking like the jaws of judgment. For Anna, it was no swift impalement. The mechanism allowed slow closure, spikes pricking then piercing, drawing out agony in measured increments, a theater of torment where death was the final merciful curtain. In chaining her flight, they built a cage that mirrored their own captivity. The psychological insight burrows deep. Betrayal, self-inflicted and societal, a rage born of broken trust. Habsburg lords, their dynasties crumbling like autumn leaves, saw in Anna's escape a personal affront. The delusion that loyalty was a chain they alone could forge, and women's wanderlust a rot undermining the gilded edifice. Her story ignited a fury in the courts, paranoia that one seamstress's scissors might snip the threads of feudal fealty, unraveling ambitions stitched with royal blood. The chains motif returns, slithering through the narrative like rust in the rain. Her manacles, the maiden's spikes, the empire's invisible bonds, all heavy with the stone-like weight of unyielding expectation. Anna's locket from Marguerite's echo now dangles from the maiden's hasp, a decaying gold bauble, its pear tree engraving mocking the fruits of freedom denied. The square fills despite the deluge, umbrellas blooming like black fungi, the crowd a murmur of schadenfreude and suppressed sympathy. Executioners in oilskins unbolt the maiden, her interior a forest of spikes glinting wetly, tips beaded with condensation like tears of the damned. Anna is divested of her sodden gown, shivering in shift and shadow, her chains unlocked only to be refastened inside, wrists to rings, ankles to base, body positioned in mock repose. Mercy for the repentant, the herald booms, but his eyes betray the lie. The door swings wide, a slow zoom into abyss, and she steps in, the first pricks kissing her skin like 1,000 venomous lovers, shoulders, thighs, breasts nicked to beads of blood that mingle with rain trickling down the spikes. But the betrayal had only just begun. The shock moment crashes like the thunder overhead, a cataclysm of calculated cruelty. The door closes inch by inexorable inch, levers groaning under the warder's grip, spikes advancing in a ballet of barbarity. First, the superficial stings multiply, flesh yielding to points that dimple, then puncture, crimson rivulets tracing paths down her torso like veins of molten lava. At the halfway mark, deeper wounds bloom, spikes thrusting into calves and forearms with meaty thuds, muscle parting in ragged tears, blood sheeting warm and insistent. Anna's gasps escalate to whimpers, then to flesh-tearing screams that pierce the storm, her body twisting futilely, each shift grinding barbs deeper into quivering tissue. The final quarter seals her doom. Spikes claiming eyes, tongue, genitals in a frenzy of penetration, one through her cheek pinning lips in eternal silence, another rending the abdomen to spill loops of intestine in glistening coils. She convulses, a marionette of agony, the maiden's embrace flooding with blood that pools at her feet, steaming in the chill. Her last breath rattles, a gurgle drowned by rain, the locket crushed against her chest, its gold flaking like betrayed promises. The maiden they called Mercy was but a bridal bed of spikes. Hours later, the device is opened to a corpse sculpted in gore, spikes withdrawn leaving a colander of flesh, her form a ruin etched in the annals of atrocity. The irony haunts like a persistent fog. The Iron Maiden, invented to punish flight, became a flight in itself. From life to legend, Anna's tale smuggling across borders in ballads sung by seamstresses, her chains reforged into symbols of solidarity. They entombed her to end her wandering, but in death, she walked free among the chained. This betrayal of the body politic resonates in modern migrations, where borders bite like spikes, and women's escapes are met with ironclad rejection, echoes in refugee camps, and visa denials where freedom's price is paid in blood. Yet Anna's spikes were the prelude to the throne's own thorns. In the opulent decay of Versailles, a queen's fall awaited, her punishment a crimson satire on royalty's rot. And in that blood-soaked moment, everything shattered. Maiden's spiked embrace pause here. Chained and cornered, would you fight the door or beg for closure? Comment below and hit like if you're hooked. Did the maiden redeem or merely revenge? Vote now. The Thames churns like a serpent's coil under the leaden skies of 1662 London, its banks choked with the detritus of empire, rotting timbers, fish guts, and the occasional bloated corpse bobbed up from the depths. Fog rolls in from the estuary, thick as a hangman's hood, muffling the cries of watermen and the distant toll of St. Paul's bells. On the wharf near the Fleet Ditch, a wooden frame sways precariously over the brackish tide. The cucking stool, that aquatic gibbet, its seat a splintered throne lashed with ropes that creak like breaking bones. A woman is bound to it. Her wrists raw from hemp burns, her skirts sodden and heavy as chainmail, face pale as the foam that laps hungrily below. She is Isabel Thorne, a tavern-keeper's widow accused of brawling with her tongue. Her sharp retorts to lecherous constables and cheating brewers deemed a public nuisance in the Restoration's raucous streets. She tasted the river's bile on her lips, the water's whisper promising both judgment and oblivion, blind to how it would swallow not just her breath, but the last gasps of an era's fragile freedoms. And what they plunged her into that fog-shrouded morn would ripple outward, a wave of wet terror that drowned women's defiance in the very element meant to cleanse sin. Isabel's notoriety had fermented in the ale-soaked underbelly of Southwark, where her bare and ragged staff drew the dissolute, actors fleeing Drury Lane spotlights, apprentices nursing grudges against guildmasters, women trading whispers of herbal cures and hidden lovers. Widowed young by the plague's scythe, she ruled her domain with a wit as biting as vinegar, calling out the hypocrisy of aldermen who preached piety by day and poured maids by night. But in the coffee houses of the Strand, her barbs curdled into complaints, petitions from neighbours claiming her words incited riotous assemblies, a veiled fear of the female networks brewing beneath the surface of Charles II's merry court. The trial at the Old Bailey was a burlesque of justice, justices in starched ruffs reciting Star Chamber edicts, her pleas drowned in laughter as witnesses mimicked her scoldish snarls. Slow zoom on the stool's timbers, warped by years of dunkings, stained with the green patina of algae and old blood. The major historical beat surges with the ducking stool's descent, a relic of 13th century Anglo-Saxon law evolved into this 17th century spectacle, reserved predominantly for women whose turbulent tongues threatened the social levees. A chair of rough oak, mounted on a pivot arm like a gallows beam, it swung victims into the river's maw, 3 dunks standard, sometimes more for the unrepentant, choking lungs with filth, bruising flesh on the current's rocks, often culminating in accidental or intentional drowning. Unlike the iron's dry bite, this was liquid cruelty, a baptism in reverse where purification came through asphyxiation, the crowd's cheers mingling with splutters like a profane liturgy. In drowning her voice, they flooded the silence with their own unspoken fears. The psychological insight surfaces here, a riptide of madness, delusion, the intoxicating belief in control through chaos. Post-Civil War England, its scars still raw from regicide's blade, clung to rituals that restored hierarchy, women's punishment a proxy for the nation's fractured order. Isabel's crime masked a deeper rage, ambition thwarted, the widow's enterprise seen as emasculation of male patrons, her camaraderie with other women a coven of subversion. Magistrates, haunted by the ghosts of leveler uprisings where wives marched beside husbands, deluded themselves that one dunk could exorcise the specter of collective fury. It was paranoia distilled to brine, the conviction that women's words were waves eroding the throne's foundations, and only submersion could stem the tide. The iron maw motif recurs, devouring anew, the stool's ropes like bridles reins, the water a fluid cage closing over mouth and will, each link in the chain of cruelty heavier with the sediment of societal silt. The wharf teems with spectators, Fishwives with baskets clutched like shields, apprentices catcalling from the railings, constables in tricorns smirking as the ropes tighten. Isabel is hoisted aboard, the chair groaning under her weight, her pleas, "Mercy, sirs, 'twas but jest," met with jeers that echo off the bridge's arches. The operator, a grizzled waterman with hands like barnacle-crusted oars, signals the pivot. She feels the world tilt first, stomach lurching as the arm swings seaward, the Thames rising to greet her like a jealous suitor. Legs bound to the legs, torso lashed tight, she dangles inches above the swell, spray misting her face with the stench of sewage and salt. But the immersion had only just begun. The shock plunges downward in a vortex of violation, a slow-motion submersion into soul-crushing betrayal. The ropes release, and she drops, chair and captive crashing into the murk with a slap that echoes like a thunderclap muffled in wool. Water engulfs her, cold as a grave's kiss, flooding nostrils and mouth with the Thames's toxic brew. Turds and tannery runoff, shards of bone from upstream gibbets. She thrashes, lungs burning as the current drags the chair under, splintered wood gouging thighs, ropes cinching tighter in the struggle. Bubbles erupt in frantic chains, her screams silenced to gurgles, vision blurring to the green-black void where eels dart like demons. Hoisted gasping after an eternity of 90 seconds, she retches bile and river weeds, chest heaving. But the pivot swings again, deeper this time, the dunk prolonged to 2 minutes. Pressure crushing ribs, water forcing into ears and sinuses in a drowning symphony of muffled booms. The third plunge seals the grotesquerie. Held under by a merciful constable's boot on the rope, her body convulses in flesh-ripping agony, limbs battering the chair until bones crackle, blood clouding the water in crimson blooms. Surfaced at last, half-dead and hallucinating drowned sisters rising vengeful from the depths, she slumps, a sodden effigy. The crowd's applause fading to uneasy murmurs as her eyes, wild and water-veined, damn them all. The river they called Cleanser was but a throat eager for women's wrath. Revived in the jail's straw, Isabel survives to a life of whispers, her tavern shuttered, but her legend ferments in broadsheets sold at Tyburn fairs. The haunting irony laps at the edges, the ducking meant to quench rebellion only amplified it, women banding in secret, dunking societies to smuggle aid and alms, the stool's splashes echoing in pamphlets that mocked the mighty. They sought to drown her fire in water, but in the depths she learned to breathe rebellion. This delusion of control through calamity persists in today's floods of misinformation and cancel culture, where women's outspokenness is dunked in viral outrage, reminding us that some rivers run deeper than law. Yet Isabel's waves were the final surge in this tide of torment. As the fog lifts on history's shore, what legacies linger in the muck? His fate was sealed, though for all of us it still unfolds. Stool of submerged fury. Pause here. Plunged into silence. Would you surface fighting or sink into strategy? Comment below and hit like if you're hooked. Did the ducking purify or provoke? Vote now. The motifs of iron and immersion fade now, like echoes in an emptying hall. The devouring maw of history yawning wide one final time, before snapping shut on the silence it so craved. Picture the Thames once more, but in twilight's bruised hush, where the water lies still, its surface a mirror cracked by the ghosts of Elspeth's bridal, Greta's claws, Marguerite's pear, Anna's spikes, Isabel's dunks, each a ripple in the crimson archive of women's waged war against their own erasure. The air grows heavy, not with fog, but with the weight of unwritten laments, the faint drip of blood from rusted chains mingling with the river's eternal murmur. Torchlight gutters low, casting long shadows that stretch toward us, viewers pulling us into the frame as complicit witnesses, our modern breaths shallow in the chill. We have traversed these shadowed galleries, from Scotland's salt-stung squares to Bavaria's frost-bitten braziers, from Paris's dripping vaults to Prague's storm-lashed bridges, and London's fog-wreathed wharves. Each woman, Elspeth with her spiked tongue, Greta's ravaged swells, Marguerite's blooming ruin, Anna's spiked bridal bed, Isabel's watery grave, embodies not isolated agonies but the grotesque ballet of a world that sculpted punishment as performance, women's bodies as stages for male mendacity. These devices, forged in the fires of fear, were no mere tools of correction. They were symphonies of sadism conducted to the rhythm of unraveling empires. The scold's bridle gagged the gale, the breast ripper flayed fidelity, the pear swelled secrets into screams, the Iron Maiden embraced escape with thorns, the ducking stool baptized defiance in death's font. In their devising, society revealed its rotting core, a delusion that cruelty could cauterize chaos, that blood could bind the brittle bonds of power. In the end, their thrones were just gilded graves, waiting for the flood. Yet pause amid the decay, let the psychological detritus settle like silt. These torments were born of a profound betrayal, not just of flesh, but of potential. Paranoia festered in the halls of the mighty, where ambition's gold leaf peeled to expose the lead beneath. Men's rage at women's agency, be it tongue, touch, thought, flight, or fellowship, mirrored their own caged souls, trapped in delusions of dominion. The haunting irony gleams eternal. Each spike, claw, petal, and plunge, meant to shatter spirits, only forged them sharper, scattering shards that pierced the veil of obedience. Elspeth's muffled roar birthed ballads, Greta's scars, sisterhoods, Marguerite's confessions, clandestine libraries, Anna's impalement, émigré epics, Isabel's gasps, underground guilds. These women, reduced to spectacles, became specters, haunting the ledgers of law with their unquenched fire, proving that the maw devours its maker in time. His crown felt heavier with every drowned heartbeat, the iron links of legacy dragging even kings to the depths. And herein lies the philosophical thorn. What price do we pay for power when its preservation demands the mutilation of half our humanity? In pruning women's wills like thorns from a crown, did they not crown themselves with curses, dooming dynasties to wither in the soil of their own savagery? These echoes resound in today's gilded cages, from glass ceilings cracked by Dahmer Me Too's hammer, to algorithmic bridles silencing dissent, from border walls spiking migrant dreams, to online mobs ducking voices in digital deluges. Think of the surveillance states that pair our privacies, or the body-shaming feeds that rip a self-worth. The grotesque persists, subtler but no less devouring, a reminder that history's blood does not dry. It seeps into our streams, staining the scrolls we yet unroll. As the river claims the last light, the chains rust silent in the muck, the maw's jaws slacken at last. What do you see in these waters? Monsters of the past, or mirrors to our present? Comment below. Which punishment chilled you deepest, and how does it haunt our world today? And that was the price of being born royal, or, in their shadow, of daring to roar.